Ladies and gentlemen, welcome wrestling fans worldwide to Knoxville and the Great Smoky Mountains for the Ron Fuller Tennessee Studcast.
6 feet 9 inches tall, 265 pounds.
This historic podcast from one of the most respected and successful wrestlers and promoters will follow the footsteps of the largest and oldest wrestling family on the planet.
Listen to what I'm saying. That's right. Bring that camera in here a little bit closer.
Through 93 years and 4 generations.
The stud has arrived.
Old school or new fan, this unique broadcast will educate and captivate as Ron details decades of professional wrestling's growth with truly unforgettable stories.
I want those people out there at home to hear the stud.
Sit back and enjoy the ride with the Tennessee Stud.
The Tennessee Stud. You will learn that name. You will remember it.
And now,
the stud is here.
All right, everybody, welcome in once again. It's David Summers hosting another Studcast with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. It's the story of wrestling in America as told by the Stud, whose family started the profession 100 years ago. Now, we step back into the ring, back into time, and into the Great Smoky Mountains with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. What's going on, Ron?
Oh, geez, man. Beautiful day here. Finally come out of that snow. Wow, we had a great couple of days, man. I never saw anything like it. Went from 70 to down to 11 in 2 days' time. Nice, beautiful day. Trees blooming, whole deal. And 1 day later, 6 inches of snow, and now there's no buds there anymore.
Yeah, I saw you in some really good videos. I saw you out amongst the snow and the ice and the creek. Now, one of the creeks, I think you said it was right near your house.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's one on each side. So,
okay.
I got a creek on both sides, in the front and the back. And, yeah, it's pretty crazy, man. Water's been real high in those creeks. Obviously, you've been getting a lot of rain before these big storms that came through that brought the snow. And then once the snow melts, the water rolls again. So it's a crazy, crazy thing. I've never been around anything like it, man. It dropped from 70 down to 11 in basically about 18 hours.
Hey, that's pretty drastic. It really is. But listen, the videos, the stuff you've been shooting when you've been out with the snow, I mean, it's a beautiful place, but you're kind of up against some extremes, some really cold, and then in the summertime, it does get pretty hot there in Tennessee too, right?
Oh, yeah. It gets really warm, man. You got a little bit of that Florida humidity in the middle of the summer. You can bank on that. So, but it's beautiful. I'm really enjoying it.
That's awesome.
And I'm ready to jump into, man, our Studcast. I mean, wow, this thing is really turning into, now that this second territory is cranked in, this is an experience for me, man. I'm having to try to figure all this out, Dave.
Yeah, I think I asked you a couple of weeks ago if you've ever been spinning plates like at the circus or juggling cats, one of those, because I don't know how you're going to keep up with 2 territories, but hey, Ron, listen, I'm going to tell you the Studcasts are really on fire. I mean, that's what you were just saying. I've been looking forward to this episode specifically since last week. When you gave us a hint about it, you said this Studcast is going to be telling us about the most famous match in the history of your 14 years as a promoter in the sport. So it's got to be a big one. So tell us, get started today with where we headed on this ride.
Well, it's going to cover, man, like I've been saying, a lot of things. It's going to cover, obviously, 2 southeastern events in 2 different territories, 500 miles apart. And it's going to begin in Knoxville, Tennessee, and this one's going to end in Dothan, Alabama, 5 days later. And on Sunday, March 5th, 1978, in Knoxville, Ronnie Garvin is going to face off against 2 men in what was an extremely surprising, handicap match as part of a triple main event in the Coliseum. 5 days later, we're going to talk about a huge tournament that was being held in Alabama to crown a new Gulf Coast champion in Southeastern Gulf Coast territory. And that's it's just in its second week as a new territory. So for only the second time in its history, Southeastern was running 2 events from the Ohio River down to the Gulf of Mexico.
Wow. I mean, that's close to 1,000 miles apart, I'm guessing, Stud, but it's got to be close to that. That's an amazing expansion of a territory. It's similar to what you're going to be doing today with your Studcast and YouTube channel, and now a streaming channel for fans around the world. You were becoming big time in 1978, and it seems like you're doing it again 44 years later in this new age of technology.
Well, yeah, man, that's true, Dave. I can't deny that, man. I'm kind of beginning to see a dream come true in a way, to compile as many of my Southeastern, Continental, and USA TV shows as possible so the fans around the world can see what wrestling back in that time frame was like compared to what it's like today, I guess, you know. So it's been interesting so far, I can tell you that.
Well, I tell you what, you're doing a great job collecting those awesome TV shows, plus producing your own new shows. YouTube Southeastern Rewind has tremendous stud stories, every new Studcast, and classic matches from Southeastern and Gulf Coast days on top of that. And it has all 23 of the USA TV shows, but nothing compared to your new streaming channel. It is elite, dude.
Oh, man, I'm really proud of it, man. And yes, the Southeastern Rewind YouTube channel has a lot of content on it, that's for sure. But the streaming channel, the ClassicContinentalWrestling.com, man, that thing is everything that I've ever done and everything that I'm ever going to do. It's all going to be there, every bit of it. And it will be an exclusive site for all of the great Southeastern TV shows. Once we get those cranked up, they're not going to be on the Southeastern Rewind YouTube channel at all. They're only going to be on that ClassicContinentalWrestling.com. And I got some news on those shows. I just got a big box from a great friend of mine, a little fellow promoter in Birmingham, Alabama, Linda Marks, great lady, sent me a box full of Southeastern, man, dates and shows that I didn't have.
Wow.
So, wow, I just picked up about another 50 great Southeastern shows. So once we get started showing these Southeasterns, I think fans are just going to be really, really highly involved in those. So, it'll be exclusive. Everything is going to be exclusive. The site, that streaming site will be the exclusive place for all great Southeastern shows that I can find. They were produced in the 7 years between 1978 and 1985. And it also has the 3-hour historic Stars of the Sport shows now, plus documentaries on such wrestlers as Wildcat Wendell Cooley, which is a great 90-minute documentary. So the first Stars of the Sport series is on the Andre the Giant, and it's already on the streaming channel, man. And this week, we got another one going on there with him, and that is no one other than the enforcer himself. Arn Anderson is going to join the Giant, man. And Arn's 3-hour journey in the sport is one of the most compelling wrestling stories ever told, I think, man. And it's all in a 3-hour live interview I did with Arn.
Wow.
So, wow, it's classic stuff. I don't think you're going to find anything like it anywhere. And like I said, I'm really proud of where I'm headed now, man, to make all of my contributions to old school wrestling available to fans worldwide. That's what I want to do. And I'm going to add my stories and my memories along with it, too.
Hey, if you leave them in a box, they're going to be in a box. They're going to collect dust, and nobody enjoys it for years and years and years. So this way, it's not in a box. Everything is open and out there for everyone to enjoy. And I think that is just absolutely awesome what you're doing. It's a legacy that you're one day will leave behind, and hopefully that's a long way away. So I think it's really, really cool that all of this is available. The already produced Stars of the Sport shows alone add up to well over 100 hours. You're releasing a new one every week. This fantastic new streaming channel called ClassicContinentalWrestling.com. ClassicContinentalWrestling.com. It costs only $4.99 per month, $39.99 for an entire year. You subscribe today and begin your tremendous ride into the best old school wrestling streaming site anywhere. All right, Stud. So where is this two-territory ride going to take us today?
Well, man, we're gonna be riding about 500 miles, man. We're going to begin in Knoxville with another great card and a historic match on that card. The TV highlights from Knoxville and the results of that card. We're going to do that. We're going to get the attendance for that card, and then we're going to jump on the horse and ride 500 miles south into Alabama and look at another great card that's full of stars, and check out that TV show there and get the results of the matches and the attendance there. And we're also going to try to get another learning tree question on this one too, man. So in the learning tree question, the gentleman asked, was any babyface in any territory ever over as good as the Bullet was in Continental? And he adds in his thought that he says, I can think of only Dusty in Florida and the Von Erichs in Texas. That's it.
Oh, that's a couple of pretty good guesses, I would say. So I might be with him on that. So it sounds like another great one today. It's loaded with action, Ron. Absolutely. Especially, I like that learning tree question. So how does this studcast begin? How do you start this thing?
Well, I want to begin it in a kind of an unusual way, a little bit like a today's training session in a way. So I want to take a look back at how a wrestling star was born in southeastern Knoxville. And that star is going to be Ronnie Garvin. And we're going to see today how and why he became a star. And the way it happened for him tells a lot about the sport itself and why it was so critical to have stars. In order to build a successful wrestling company, you had to have stars. So let's look at the history of Ronnie Garvin at the beginning of this one, after he arrived in Southeastern, and how and why he became a star for the first time in his career, I might add. I mean, he'd had a 10-year career. He had never been on top regularly, and this is the first territory that's going to ever happen for Ronnie. So he arrived in southeastern Knoxville on the first week of September in 1976. And I want to take this back to when he came and what he did and how it happened and why it happened. So we're gonna do something a little different than this one. So obviously he arrived as a heel, and then he had always been since he broke in a heel, and he spoke very broken English. You'll remember that, and some of the interviews and all the things that went on early on.
Yep.
After he got to Knoxville. He had that broken English, and because he had been born French Canadian in Montreal, Canada. And he had been at that point middle of the card wrestler for much of the 10 years that he had been in the sport. So after about 6 weeks after his arrival, on October 10th, 1976, he got his first big push as a heel. And he got involved at the end of the NWA World Title match with me and Terry Funk. And he sent me to the hospital by jumping off the top rope on me several times, then collecting Funk's $10,000 bounty money for hurting me. And strong angles like that one was the beginning of building a star. And so to help him become a star, and because of his inability to do great interviews that didn't match his work in the ring, which was just absolutely wonderful, he had trouble interviewing, we gave him a manager, Big Bad John, to do his talking for him.
Yep.
And that started him on his way, man. I mean, hence what he was capable of in the ring, and you add in Big Bad John's attitude and his interview skills, and wow, that was a pretty darn good combination.
I kind of miss Big Bad John.
Yeah, I do too, man. So next after he won the Southeastern belt for the first time, then he went and threw the belt off the Gay Street Bridge in downtown Knoxville into the Tennessee River.
That's so great.
Because he said on TV, it's the ugliest belt I've ever seen. And he says, I'm going to throw it off the Tennessee Bridge, downtown Knoxville, 2:00 on Saturday and Sunday afternoon, whatever day it was. I don't remember what the day, but I know it was in the afternoon. And we kind of expected that there might be a few people would show up on the bridge, But wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it turned out to be unbelievable. They had traffic stopped for miles in both directions. It closed down downtown, man. And there were hundreds of fans on the bridge. So it became a huge story. And what happened is it got publicity not just in small places and not just around the wrestling and the wrestling TV show. It got publicity for everywhere, all the television stations and all the radio stations, and everybody covered the fact that this wrestler threw this belt off the bridge and that it shut down downtown because so many came to see it happen. So he was suddenly known everywhere. In that part of the country. That's legendary stuff, man. That don't happen ordinarily, and wow, it just really kicked him off even bigger. So 3 months after that, February 1977, he gets into the finals of the first ever car tournament in Southeastern for a Cadillac, and he's in the finals against Bob Armstrong, and he lost the match, but he made a bigger impression off of doing something bad than if he had won the match and won the car. So he went straight to the car and he grabbed up the steel stanchion that was placed around the car to protect it. And by golly, he throws it through the front windshield of a brand new Cadillac, man. So the legend grew and it just kept growing. So then he had turned babyface for about a month in March of 1977. He'd been there for about 6 months. And then he suddenly had to leave the territory for a month because personal issues in Canada. And in fact, he was a heel, and Rob and I turned him babyface so that we didn't expect him to ever come back, so that he could get some heels. He could get some, heels over before he left. And so when we thought he was gone for good, then he came back. So we had to turn him back heel again. And so we had a good reason, because another great Canadian star happened to come in just about the time that Garvin came back, and that was Joe LeDuc. And Joe LeDuc arrived as a babyface, and LeDuc had kind of tracked down Garvin and was intent upon getting even with Ronnie Garvin and Bob Orton Jr., who both as a tag team had ended up ruining his brother's career, injuring his brother so badly he never wrestled again. So Garvin, who had been fighting with Bob Orton Jr. before he left, he comes back and he right away goes and teams up with him again. And they become the most unbeatable tag team in Southeastern Tag Team Championship, man. And obviously, he had more heat than ever. So in November of 1977, Bob Orton Jr., his tag partner, became a huge babyface by turning on Garvin. So he had so much heat that Orton Jr. became a babyface just by turning on him. And their tag team run obviously was over, but Garvin got even more heat then because he ended up beating Bob Orton Jr. And on December 16th of 1977, he hurt him so bad that Bob Orton Jr. was gone from the territory.
Wow. Yeah.
So he's still packing on the heat, man. Now he's been there more than a year. He's been there 15 months, and everything he's doing is just making him hotter. So on January 22nd, 1978, Garvin sets his sights on a young and popular babyface, Roy Lee Welch. And then for 4 weeks in a row, he can't beat this guy, Roy Lee Welch. And, Roy Lee is not a big name, but Garvin just can't get him to give up, and he can't beat him. So for 4 weeks, he loses. He doesn't lose, but he's not able to pin or beat Roy Lee Welch. So on February 26th, which is just a couple of weeks ago in our time frame, he broke Roy Lee Welch's arm. That's a way of doing it. So that kind of brings us to today's Studcast, man. And this great card that we're going to be talking about on March the 5th, 1978, the Knoxville Coliseum. And it's one of the cards that card's outstanding matches was Roy Lee Welch with a cast on his arm and a mystery partner was going to be taking on Ronnie Garvin in a handicap match with Garvin against two guys.
Wow. All right. So listen, I want to mention this, and you mentioned it earlier, but I remember the Studcast episode from it's been quite a while back, where you and Robert were talking about, man, what are we going to do with Ronnie Garvin? We got him in from Canada. He's a very gifted athlete. He just can't speak English very well. So we've literally, as fans, seen him go from the Canadian accent that was so strong we couldn't understand him to now he is one of your top stars. And you and Robert really gave him everything he needed to get to this point. You've seen him as one of the best heels possible, one of the best baby faces possible, and now what's next for Ronnie Garvin? I think that's an amazing story, Stud. It's definitely explains a lot about how and why Ronnie Garvin was such a big star in Southeastern.
Well, you're right by saying he was becoming, man. And then not already there, because this match in this studcast is going to change everything for him, man. Fans are going to respect him, and it's going to bring him to a star level, man. This is going to be the match that I was talking about that may be the best that was ever in the history of my 14 years as a promoter.
Well,
when I watched it, I just says, wow. This is what happens. It's unbelievable, and it's that's what's happening in this one.
Well, I can't wait to get to it. Let's get started, Ron. Come on.
Well, whoa, Dave. As usual, man.
What now?
I'm just setting the stage, man. The match is going to come later in the show. It's more like the main event than the opener.
Yeah, I should have known. So, who and what was on that Knoxville card? And I think we're talking about March 5th, 1978.
Well, it was a triple main event card. Big card. Great card. 2 of the 3 matches were the exact same opponents. They were facing off against each other again. And the last time they met in both of these matches, the opponents in both of these matches met, was in loser-leave matches that were 5 months earlier, in October of 1977. So these 2 main events were both no DQ matches. And the first match on the card that night is an indication, man, right away of the power of this night's events, man. The opening match was Tony Charles up against Ricky Gibson in the opening match. There's no better way to start a wrestling afternoon than putting 2 guys like that in the ring together in the first match. Then in the second match, Ron Wright had dumped his old team, man. Ron Wright was he'd take advantage of situations, man, and all of a sudden he has found himself another team. And he liked to say with this team, he wasn't he brings them there and he manages them and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. He says Ron Wright presents Dennis Condrey and Phil Hickerson. So Ron Wright had already dropped, like I just said, his former tag champions, Don Carson and the Assassin, because the Assassin got injured and he was out of action. Mm-hmm. So this dynamic new tag team that he had already conquered everyone on the far side of the state in the Memphis territory. They had beat them all, and they were going to take Southeastern by storm, man. This was their first night and first afternoon, and they were up against Jimmy Golden and a brand new other talented young star man named Rip Smith. Third match on this card was Robert Fuller and Joe LeDuc against the Hangman and Ron Wright. He's got to be in the ring as well. And then the first main event of the 3 main events on that card was that Roy Lee Welch, cast on his arm with his mystery partner against Ronnie Garvin in the handicap match. Mm-hmm. Garvin against the 2 of them. The second main event was the no DQ, the Georgia Jawjacker versus Don Carson. Then the last time those 2 had met was October 7th, 1977, in a loser-leave town match, in which Bob Armstrong lost. And the third main event was another no DQ match, the Tennessee Stud versus the Mongolian Stomper by Gorgeous George Jr. Another match that started with a loser-leave on October 28, 1977, when Ron Fuller got beat. And now the Tennessee Stud is doing all the work.
Wow. All right. So that's a pretty fantastic card right there, Stud. But both you and Rob had the opportunity to get even for those loser leaves matches, and Roy Lee Welch was about to pop a surprise on Ronnie Garvin that he would not soon forget. So how did this TV open up Saturday, March 4th, 1978?
Well, it opened up, man, with Les running down the TV card as it usually did, which was an outstanding card. It was a great card, man. And so Ronnie Garvin was at the set with Les when the cameras backed away. But, as always, when the cameras backed off, you usually had that big photo, the big still shot behind them. But oddly enough, there was no huge photo on the set behind them this time. And Ronnie Garvin found it a little strange too, and he even asked Les. He said, what's going on? There's no picture back there. And Les said, there's going to be something up there a little later, Ronnie. And he just, he kind of went on. So they began the show with a video, and it was the end of the match from 6 days earlier on Sunday, February 26, 1978, the one in which Roy Lee had his arm broken. And obviously, it was a highly edited video from the match. It had Ronnie Garvin, showed Ronnie Garvin punishing Roy Lee's arm with all different kinds of hammer locks and wrist locks and all different things he was doing and working on that arm for the entire match. And then it showed at the end 2 powerful leaps from the top rope. Ronnie jumped off the top rope on his arm twice. And the second one it showed, it went black immediately as Roy, as soon as he landed on Roy's arm, because obviously that's the one that broke Roy's arm. And while we did that because we wanted to save the fans at home the pain and the trauma, man, of seeing something like that, which those there that were live couldn't avoid it. They all saw it, and I saw it myself, and I decided we can't show this. Oh. This is horrible. Oh. So it was really a nasty thing, and the people at home didn't see that. But wow, the people in the studio were there, most of them, and they still screamed. Wow. When it happened. They thought they were going to see it again. Yeah. So Garvin, he jumped right on it, man. He bragged about finally getting it done, and then Les didn't know what he's talking about. He said, his plan was to finish that punk Roy Lee Welch's career. And, he broke his arm really, really bad. And, and then that might be the end of it. So Les just asked him a really honest question. And he was probably, and it was a good, legitimate question. He asked him why he had such a vendetta against a young wrestler like Roy Lee Welch.
Exactly.
Yeah, what's this all about, Ronnie?
Right.
So Ronnie gladly told him the story, man, about how Roy Lee's dad, Lester Welch, had broken his arm, Ronnie's arm, 7 years earlier in Florida, and how he had waited all this time to get even, and how good it felt to finally have gotten it done.
Wow.
He wasn't sad about it. He said, I've been waiting a long time to get even with Lester Welch, and breaking his son's arm, that makes me feel good, God. And then he said something like, an arm for an arm, like an eye for an eye.
Uh-huh.
And the fans booed him like crazy, man. I mean, he had tremendous heat. Wow. And then he screamed for them to shut up, and he got up and they headed to the ring because he was in the first match of the day. And nobody in the building was aware what the card was for the next day, because they never knew until the first interview what the card was. And not even Garvin. Most wrestlers didn't care what the card was, So Les asked him to come back to the set. Well, Ronnie, please come back and sit down with us. I have another question for you. So Ronnie came back kind of begrudgingly, and then he, Les asked him, he said, if Roy Lee Welch challenged you to another match, and he was willing to get in the ring with you with his broken arm, would you agree to allow Roy Lee to pick any partner he wanted for a handicap match, one against you against the two of them? So, and I was now, bear in mind, I'm down there in Dothan. I don't see this TV, but Les tells me how all this went. Man, but he couldn't wait to tell me how it went. And he said, when he asked him the question, he said, Garvin's face lit up into one big, huge grin. And He said he didn't speak to me. He shouted at me, and he said, "Of course I would." He goes, "Then I'd have a chance to break his other arm." And then he couldn't even feed himself.
God. Oh, my God.
So the crowd exploded in boos again, and Garvin broke out, Les said, in a big laugh, man. And he says, unless, he said, he can have anybody in the world he wants as his partner. I don't care who it is. So Les says, well, thanks basically for that response, And he said, you asked me earlier, Ronnie, why we didn't have a picture behind the set here. And he goes, but I think now it's time for maybe us to get that picture up there. And he says, how would you like to see who you're going to be wrestling tomorrow afternoon? And then Bill Kincaid throws that big old full screen thing with Roy standing there with Andre the Giant. And that studio, Les said he said, I'd never heard a pop like that in the studio. They went crazy. And, he said they all jumped up on their feet. He said they were all celebrating. It was like, wow, look at this. Ronnie Garvin's going to wrestle against the Giant. And Ronnie Garvin jumped up too, Les said, and he was screaming too, but he says he wasn't screaming like the crowd. He wasn't too happy about it.
So I mean, that's an incredible way to open up a TV show when you got Andre, when you got Andre, period, that works. But how could Andre be with you in Alabama? And then also on that video, how'd that work out? There's some pretty good planning going in there.
Well, I tell you, man, and that's a good question, Dave. Andre had arrived in Knoxville. He came in early. I told you he was there for like 5 days that week, and he came in on a Wednesday, 4 days before this TV was even recorded. And I knew when he got there what the card was going to be for the next one, and that he was going to be against Ronnie Garvin. So I wanted to get a great pop on both TVs in 2 different states. So I had Andre and Roy do this recording together on Thursday before Andre and I left Knoxville on Friday, headed down to Dothan.
Yep.
To open up that southeastern Gulf Coast territory on Friday night.
Yep.
Andre was going to be on both TVs in the same day.
Wow.
He's going to be live on one in Alabama, and he's going to be on video in one in Tennessee.
Man, that's a double bang for your buck right there, stud.
Oh, but you better believe it, my man. So Garvin, he's pissed now. He charged the ring, man, and he took all his frustration out on the poor opponent, man, who wasn't prepared for an angry Ronnie Garvin.
Yeah. Do you remember?
Been that dude in the ring.
Do you remember who that opponent was?
Oh, I don't know.
Nobody does.
I didn't ask Les either, but I just pictured it, man. I see, man, this ain't good for somebody. And so Garvin took and so Garvin just would, Les said, gosh, Ron, it was just pitiful. I mean, he said the guy never got up. He said they had to go carry him out. And then he said Garvin came back to the set and he took the entire first interview because Roy Lee was going to be on the personality profile with the entire interview with the Giant, which was going to be the profile for the day. So second match on the TV was Don Carson, and he and his peanut butter club, they got it done again, and he went back to the set to join Les for the second interview, and he split it with the Georgia Jawjacker, whose interview was just like the one with Roy Lee and Andre. It was pre-recorded 4 days before the TV show was even made. And Georgia Jawjacker talked about his shot, man, to get even with Don Carson. And Carson kind of accused Bob Armstrong because he wasn't there for TV live of being scared of him, man. And because he says, I'll guarantee you Bob Armstrong knew I was going to take that mask off of him today. And we wouldn't even have to wrestle tomorrow. He said, but he said, that's okay. I'm going to make it happen anyway the next day. And, Carson had to get his part in like he was a big badass. And then obviously Bob had a great interview for his opportunity to get even.
Well, all right. So I think this is a good spot for a break. Roy Lee Welch would be next live on the personality profile with the recorded interview with the Giant, if I'm not mistaken. So I think we've got that to look forward to when we come back. And hey, by the way, remember to find Southeastern Rewind on YouTube. Subscribe, ring the bell to get reminders on when the greatest stories in wrestling are going to be dropped on YouTube. You ring our bell, we'll ring it on yours so you'll know every time. And be sure to tell your friends about Southeastern Rewind as well. So that personality profile is back when we return on this Studcast right here. All right, Studcast fans, here's what's happening on Sunday, March 13th for Southeastern Rewind. Southeastern Classics 6. Ronnie Garvin helps Terry Funk, October 10th of 1976. Monday, March 14th, Gulf Coast 3, The Intern with manager Dr. Ken Ramsey. Tuesday, March 15th, Stud Story number 23, NWA champion Ronnie Garvin. Wednesday, March 16th, Studcast number 241, Garvin versus Andre the Giant. Thursday, March 17th, Continental TV number 21. Friday, March 18th, Gulf Coast 4, another classic Gulf Coast match. Next Sunday, March 20th, Southeastern Classic 7, Toru Tanaka versus the Great Mephisto in a cage match. Next Monday, March 21st, Gulf Coast 4, another classic Gulf Coast match. Next Tuesday, March 22nd, Stud Story number 24, Vince's Greed, Part 2. Next Wednesday, March 23rd, Studcast number 242, Going Crazy. Next Thursday, March 24th, Continental TV number 22. And next Friday, March 25th, Gulf Coast 5, another classic Gulf Coast match. Hey, don't forget to subscribe now to ClassicContinentalWrestling.com for everything that has to do with the Tennessee stud, Ron Fuller. Andre the Giant, 3 hours, Stars of the Sports series is there now. And Arn Anderson's 3-hour Stars of the Sport will be added on Thursday, March 17th, Part 1, and Sunday, March 20th, Part 2. Only $4.99 per month or $39.99 per year gets you the best streaming channel in all of old school wrestling. Hey, welcome back in. It's another Studcast. David Summers here with the Tennessee stud, Ron Fuller. All right, Ron, let's get right back into it. This is another great Studcast. So what happened the rest of the show?
Well, I won't go heavily into the profile that, was done with obviously Roy Lee and the Giant, but it was good and very entertaining, but that profile was followed by Ron Wright's new tag team, man. And wow, Ron Wright, he changed his whole act as a manager. Now it became a tuxedo affair since he was presenting his new tag team, Dennis Condrey and Phil Hickerson. Mm-hmm. And so this was their first time to wrestle on TV for Southeastern. And after their first TV win, a piece of video was shown from Johnson City, Tennessee, that had been recorded on Tuesday night before this TV show. And it showed why the Southeastern tag belts had been held up by the Tennessee Athletic Commission. And the champions were the Tennessee Stud and Robert Fuller were the were the Southeastern Tag Champions. And they were wrestling against Condrey and Hickerson in their very first Tennessee match for the championship. And so, now the belts were held up, and then there was going to be a special announcement the following week by Don Curtis, the Southeastern Commissioner, about what was going to happen about these tag team belts. It was kind of a strange deal, but it gave Ron Wright the opportunity to take his boys to the set, man, and to brag on his team and how they were going to just mop up with Jimmy Golden and Rip Smith, and them boys didn't have a chance. And the old Wright to get a Tennessee dog whooping.
Here we go.
All that stuff, I guess Condrey and Hickerson are going to have to get used to those Ron Wright interviews. So, he did his thing. And then the last match on that TV was the Mongolian Stomper. And wow, he just destroyed an opponent. And Gorgeous George Jr., he had his remarks afterward about the Tennessee Stud. That's who he was in the ring with. His boy was in the ring with. And I had pre-recorded an interview to be used there as well. And I had done it on the Thursday before. along with Bob Armstrong's interview and with Andre the Giant and Roy Lee's interview. All were done at the same time.
Wow. All right, so another great TV in Knoxville, obviously, leading up to a pretty good card, too. I think spectacular. What was the results? Give us the results on that card from the next afternoon.
Well, Ricky Gibson and Tony Charles, man, they wrestled to an absolutely fantastic 20-minute babyface time limit draw. Wow. Tremendous match. Just fantastic. Everything you could ask for as a wrestling promoter. You need a good babyface match like that every once in a while to remind fans what it's all about. And, wow, they certainly did that. Then Ron Wright was thrilled, absolutely thrilled to present Dennis Condrey and Phil Hickerson for their first time in the Coliseum. And they got their win in the first Coliseum event over Jimmy Golden and Rip Smith, just like Ron had predicted. Robert Fuller and Joe LeDuc, they got a victory over the Hangman and Ron Wright. And they got it pretty easily because Ron Wright, when things got a little tough out there, he decided he's going to the dressing room. And he just went home and he left poor Hangman out there to get hung. That's about basically what happened in that match. Robert and Joe LeDuc won it pretty easily. Ron Wright just he don't want to be in the ring anymore. I think he wants to be presenting his team. So the Georgia Jawjacker got beaten by Don Carson, but it was because of all people to get involved. George Jr.
Okay.
came down and got involved in Carson's match, right, against the Jawjacker, and he caused the Jawjacker to lose. And so the Jawjacker was upset by it, obviously, and so he, in the next match, which happened to be me, or the Tennessee Stud, I should say, against the Mongolian Stomper, and the Jawjacker just came down and turned the defeat that was about to happen into a victory for the Tennessee Stud, and the Jawjacker ran GG from the ringside, and then he jacked the Stomper's jaw right in front of the referee because it was a no DQ match. And then Stud covered Mongolian Stomper in the middle of the ring. Jawjacker had knocked him out, and the referee counted the Stomper out and raised the Stud's hand. Fans like that one, and that's going to lead to some good matches for the next week because of what had happened that night. So, and I kind of saved the Garvin handicap match here against Roy Lee and Andre for the last one today, because it was, and I keep saying this, in my estimation, it was maybe the best match in Southeastern history.
Whoa. Wow. Okay.
In the history of all my wrestling companies. And Roy Lee got into the ring with the Giant for the introduction of the match. But as soon as the match, everybody was introduced and the bell rang, Roy Lee stepped out on the floor and he stood there by the ringside to watch the whole deal.
Wow.
He never got back in the ring.
Okay.
It was supposed to be a 2-against-1, but he had a broken arm. I didn't blame him.
Right.
But why would you want to get in the ring with a nut like Garvin if you had a broken arm?
Yeah.
So I watched the match as well from behind the big curtain, man, in the back of the Coliseum. And the odd thing about this match was Andre and Garvin, they had been longtime friends because both of them had spent a lot of time together in Montreal, Canada. Mm-hmm. In fact, the Giant started in Europe wrestling, and then he ended up in France, and he ended up leaving France and coming to Canada, to Montreal, because he's French Canadian, and he could speak their language, and they could speak his. So I knew that they were friends. So I went to both of them, and I said, guys, I'm going to let you guys figure your finish. And I was thinking that, if I did that Andre might give Garvin a little more, give him a little more of the match, man. So, if they both had control of the finish, maybe he might make Garvin look a little better than he might other people. So I was totally blown away, man. As every fan in that building, I stood in the back there and pulled that curtain back, and Ronnie Garvin did everything imaginable to the Giant. He hit him with chairs. He jumped off the top rope on him at least 5 times.
Wow.
He choked him with both hands at one spot, right back into the corner of the ring. And in fact, I got a picture I'm going to use on when people go to look for this studcast with Ronnie Garvin about to choke the giant to death in the corner. I mean, it's crazy, man. And he probably had the giant on the mat more than the giant had him on the mat. It was just an unbelievable match. I'd never seen anything like it.
Wow.
And when it started, the crowd obviously was totally against Garvin at the beginning of the match. But during the course of this 30 minutes, they fought for 30 minutes. It was unbelievable. The crowd, they began to watch Ronnie Garvin fight against such a huge foe by himself. And the crowd's anger, it seemed to turn from being mad into respect.
Wow.
I mean, you could feel the crowd going, wow, this Ronnie Garvin is going to beat the giant. And he actually did. In the end, he actually pinned the giant to the amazement of the crowd and myself. You know, I was like, wow, this is unbelievable. And then when he finished, he got out of the ring, and poor Roy Lee standing there, and he snatched him up and slammed him on the concrete and stomped the hell out of his broken arm. And Joe LeDuc had to come down to the ring and save him.
Good
Andre's
God.
still laying in the ring.
Wow.
You know, and so this match, man, it changed everything for Garvin. At least half of the crowd cheered him on his way to the dressing room when it was over.
Respect.
I'd never seen in all my career a heel turn babyface without a finish that was designed to make it happen. There was no finish here. It wasn't turning on anybody. This was a guy who went into the ring as a hated heel and came out with such respect that he's almost a babyface. You know, and the crowd didn't know what to think by the time it was over. But I could tell, like it or not, man, Ronnie Garvin was going to be a babyface from there on out.
Whoa. I mean, so the crowd, you said it. I think you said it. It had to be totally unexpected. So where was that going to leave you as a booker in 2 territories?
Well, I'll be honest with you, man. I've been very worried about what's going to happen in southeastern Knoxville. I mean, I got Bob Armstrong, who's there now with a mask on and really over. I've got the Tennessee Stud really over. We're going to be disappearing to Alabama in a matter of a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, right? We're not going to be here anymore. Tony Charles is going to be the next one after us to follow us down there, you know? And I'd been asking myself, what's going to happen here, man, in this territory with all 3 of us strong baby faces gone? All of a sudden, basically over a period of about a month or 6 weeks, they're gone. And then, by golly, I watched this match, and right there in front of me, in one single match, Ronnie Garvin gave me my answer, man.
Man, that's just a David and Goliath story right there. And everybody hated David in the beginning of this story. So that's pretty awesome. These studcasts are really getting good. This episode, absolutely remarkable, Stud. So, all right, are we going to Southeastern Gulf Coast now? How do you transition from an incredible match like that? I mean, how do you do this?
Well, man, you better believe we're going there, man. But first, you forgot to get me with on the attendance, my man, and it was a beautiful one, man. It was 5,850 people in that Coliseum. It was almost a total sellout.
Wow!
That saw this remarkable match. And a remarkable set of matches. It was just a tremendous afternoon. Yeah. So, let's gallop down now, man, to Dothan, Alabama. Many of us, were wrestling there for the second time. This was on Friday, March the 10th, 1978, only the second match ever in Southeastern Gulf Coast history. And it was 5 days after the Knoxville show. So Knoxville was on Sunday, 5 days later on a Friday, down there in Dothan. And so was Bob Armstrong. And the card was another great one, man. It was totally different than the Knoxville card. The card in Alabama was an 8-man tournament for the vacant Gulf Coast Championship, which had been vacant for a long period of time. They were about to close down the company, so they didn't really have a champion even. And it was going to also have one tag match on it. Because it was a tournament, it's going to have 8 total matches in all. That's a good night of wrestling for fans. So the first round of the tournament it started off with the former NWA World Champion Jack Briscoe against me, the Tennessee Stud. And I'd been a masked babyface 5 days earlier in Knoxville, but I'm a heel in this one. No mask and a heel. And Jack Briscoe was on this card as basically a favor to me because we'd been such friends in Florida over the years. And Dothan, Alabama was about a 4-hour drive from Tampa. So it wasn't so far that Jack said, no, Ron, I ain't going to do it. So Jack came and did it for me. And he's going to do more than that for me. We'll talk about that in a minute. So Bob Armstrong, second match of the tournament against Eddie Mansfield. And Bob had been a masked babyface 5 days earlier in Tennessee. So both Bob and I were wearing masks 5 days earlier in the state of Tennessee, and no mask on now in the state of Alabama. So the third tournament match was David Schultz versus the wrestling pro Tarzan Baxter, who was a big name, man, in that part of the country.
Sure was.
And he was one of the members of the Superstars tag team in Knoxville during much of 1975. He and Dick Dunn. So, wow, great match. Wow, Schultz and the pro, super match. You can imagine, man, something about pro, what a great match that was.
Yeah.
And the fourth match in the first round was Mike Stallings against Doug Gilbert, another great wrestler. And Stallings was at the top of his game. He was really becoming a tremendous babyface. Then there was one tag match, Reuben Gibson, who's also known as Robert Gibson, who is, he's a Hall of Famer now, Rock and Roll Express. And Robert Gibson was a partner with Charlie Cook, who was a Black Star, man, and a really great wrestler. And they wrestled against the Assassins with Roger Smith and Randy Colley, managed by another Gulf Coast veteran, Rip Tyler. So we've already talked about the TV to promote this card. It was last week's TV studcast, right? I mean, that was the TV that had promoted this, and it even had that live interview with me, called my introduction to Alabama about this tournament on that last TV show. That was the first show that we ran, and it was promoting this tournament. And I remember talking in the interview about being in the tournament, and I'm going to win it. And so Andre was also on the last TV. And that was the first ever Southeastern Gulf Coast TV produced at WTVY Studios in Dothan. So the next day's TV show would have the former NWA World Champion Jack Briscoe on it. And Jack said, yeah, I'll stay over, Ron, work your TV. So because of his tremendous TV exposure from his home state, which was Florida, he was an Oklahoma boy, but Florida was where he presided for most of his career. He was very recognizable in that part of the country. You might have even seen him in matches. I don't know, Dave.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure.
in Dothan, in the farm center.
Yes.
Yeah. And so it had been a huge feather in our hat, man, to open the first TV show with Andre and come back on the second one with Jack Briscoe, the world champion.
Yeah.
It was the type of thing that fans noticed, and it didn't take long like that to build a huge TV audience, man. The faster that TV audience got built, the sooner Southeastern Gulf Coast was headed to success. So the Dothan area, just to give the people an idea of the television situation in that territory, the Dothan area, and about 100 miles, at least 100 miles in all directions probably, was covered by this powerful WTVY signal, man. Its signal went south to Panama City and west almost to Pensacola, Florida. And both those cities were in the Gulf of Mexico. It went north to almost Columbus, Georgia, east into most of southern Georgia, and west to almost Montgomery, Alabama. It was a strong television station with a great signal. And then we had another station in Montgomery, and that had been carrying the Gulf Coast TV shows for years, a part of that territory for many years. And they'd also been receiving shows. since we started producing them in Knoxville and sending them south, which we had produced 3 or 4 shows in Knoxville before these first 2 that actually came out of WTVY. And they were the oldest TV stations associated with the show and associated with Gulf Coast. So by this second TV show produced on TVY, they were both those stations in their 6-week airing shows that had Southeastern and different wrestlers on them that were going to be associated with the new company.
Wow.
So the big news was the very strong WKRG TV in Mobile, Alabama, where I made that presentation a few months ago, sat down with all the guys to talk about the TV show and how crazy they went over seeing the wrestling show. They aired that this was their second show that they were going to air. So they were on board from the very first time we ran a match, and the very first TV we sent to them was the first one from last week out of WTVY. And they're going to get this second one that we were doing today, the next day. Mm-hmm. So the bad news, there was some bad news out there, though, with all the TV stations, is that it was going to traditionally take about 3 months of TVs before wrestling businesses started to take off.
3 months?
Yes,
wow.
3 months.
Wow, it's really got to...
That's a critical number. You know, now we're 6 weeks in, we're halfway there on just 2 stations.
Yeah.
You know, so then, you know, WKRG, we're not going to get that benefit for quite a bit longer. So, yeah. So we're going to struggle down there. And that's when we talk about that territory there, it's not like Knoxville. Yeah. It's kind of like Knoxville was at the beginning when I took over in 1974.
Yeah.
It's struggling. It's not got the real big houses, but it's going to go there.
Yeah. And 90 days, you're right. It's a long time. And in your shoes, where you're trying to make money and not spend money, I'm pretty sure there was a lot of that going on. I mean, that's pretty cool. But you had so much going on. But now with 2 companies, 500 miles apart, how are you going to be able to handle everything?
I'm thinking the next studcast may be called Going Crazy. That's kind of how I was going to handle it, man. I mean, it certainly wasn't going to be easy. I recognized that within the first 2 weeks. It was extremely important to get the right people into the right position to even have a chance at being successful. So luckily, in an odd way, the good Lord blessed me by breaking Roy Lee's arm. Roy Lee finished up in Knoxville.
I'm not going to tell Roy Lee.
The Garvin match.
I'm not going to
studcast because he had a broken arm. He couldn't wrestle anymore there, and he was the perfect guy for me to have handle a lot of the business that I couldn't handle personally. That was going to make us a success. So it was a great deal. It was a perfect situation, man. Roy Lee got his cast all cracked up because Garvin stomped the heck out of it on the concrete floor. But he went back and got it recasted, and he moved to Pensacola. No. So that's part of the answer to your question there, man, as odd as that may seem. And he's going to be my right-hand man there, and he was going to carry the responsibility for lots of the business part of things. So that's my answer. I hate to say it, but Roy Lee's bad injury turned out to be an asset for the company.
I'm not going to tell your cousin you said that. All right. So, but how about travel back and forth between the 2 territories on a weekly basis? Because again, as we said a while ago, 500 miles apart. That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, well, yeah, and that's why I say, in 2 weeks I'm seeing that. It was a nightmare for Bob Armstrong and I. We're the 2 guys that's basically doing the back and forth, and every Friday and Saturday we're going to be in Alabama, and every Sunday afternoon we're going to be in Tennessee. And then I was trying to phase us out of Knoxville as soon as possible to avoid these 500-mile one-way trips every weekend. And it was a lot easier for Bob than it was for me, since his home had always been in Marietta, Georgia, which is just outside of Atlanta. And when you look at the map, it happens to be about halfway between Knoxville and Dothan. Mm-hmm. So when he was traveling, he could leave after the Knoxville event and have to be in Dothan the next night, but he only had to drive down to Atlanta, spend the night, drive on the next day down to Dothan. Me, I had to drive all the way if I was going to drive.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
he was able to stop off halfway, basically in Marietta, and then go and finish the trip. Me on the other end, I didn't have a stop off point, man. So I was doing a lot of flying back and forth. It was hard to travel by yourself. 500 miles there, get in the car, and 500 miles back. It was a pretty big struggle.
Oh, no doubt. All right, Stud. So the results on that Dothan card, March 10th, 1978, and are we still talking like this is the second week it even existed?
That's it.
Yeah. Okay.
We're in the very second match that was ever had by Southeastern down there in that Gulf Coast territory.
Right.
So in the first round, Bob Armstrong had won his match over Eddie Mansfield. I pinned Jack Briscoe, man, and we were in the second match. And I pinned Jack Briscoe, and I kind of cheated a little bit. What the heck? I'm a heel, man, and I hadn't healed in a few years. And so I kind of popped him with something, and I got the 3 count on him. And along comes Bob Armstrong, goody two-shoes, down to the ring, and he ratted me out. And he told the ref where I'd hidden the object. The ref found what I'd hit Jack with, and he reversed the decision. He gave Jack Briscoe a shot to go on into the second round. And that was kind of the beginning of a feud between Bob Armstrong and myself that's going to last off and on for the next 10 years. So Mike Stallings beat Doug Gilbert, and David Schultz beat the Mass Wrestling Pro to finish out the first round of the tournament. In the second round of the tournament, Bob Armstrong ends up wrestling against Jack Briscoe. Imagine that match, if you can, Dave. How good was that?
Yeah. Wow.
Wow. I mean, was that a classic? I mean, there wasn't a lot of people in that farm center, but every one of them in there walked away talking about that one. Bob beat Jack.
Yeah.
And
wow.
David Schultz beat Mike Stallings. In anything but a babyface match, because Schultz was desperate to become a star, and wow, he had it, and he was going to learn. But before he left there, 6-8 months later, he was going to be that star.
Wow,
and so. Bob obviously then Bob Armstrong's going to meet David Schultz in the finals, but they had the tag match next, which was and the Assassins won over Reuben Gibson and Charlie Cook in the tag match. A little bit of interference, I think, from Rip Tyler on the outside. You had to start building heat, man, in order to start to draw money, and that was going to be the secret for the next few months to get that thing off the ground. So Bob Armstrong made fans happy in the end of the night, man, with a pin over David Schultz, and he received the very old Gulf Coast Championship belt.
Wow.
Ronnie Garvin would have thrown it off the bridge.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
it wouldn't have lasted long.
Yeah.
But I watched that match, man, the whole match between Bob Armstrong and David Schultz.
Yeah.
And I could tell Bob was going to be a star in the future there, man, on his very first win. It didn't take but that one win, man, for me to see that Bob's going to be a monster there. So is David Schultz going to be a monster?
I was about to ask, and you were absolutely right about Bob. How far away was David Schultz from being Dr. D, Dr. Death?
He's going to be Dr. D within a couple of months, man.
Oh, wow. Okay,
He's going to right away become Dr. D, and he got that name actually, man, from carrying around a briefcase full of all kinds of pills. He was a pill freak.
Wow.
And he'd take anything, and he would open his case. The guy started nicknaming him Doctor right away.
Okay, so that was a backstage nickname.
That was a backstage nickname.
Okay, but then at some point they started calling him Dr. Death, Dr. D.
Dr. D.
Yeah.
There was no death on it. They just called him Dr. D, David Schultz.
Okay.
And but it actually started from a real thing with his little peel cachet that he carried around with him all the time.
That's fast.
So,
That's really.
And David Schultz is going to become a monster in that territory.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't wait to get to some of the things that happened down there, Dave. Some of the things that had riots. Yeah. We're going to talk riots. Man. That part of the country down there was filled with fans that wanted a piece of it.
Oh, we didn't take it all that seriously.
Oh, boy. Yeah. It was dangerous part of the country to wrestle.
Yeah, for real. All right, but early on, only the second week of wrestling, how did you do attendance-wise?
Well, it wasn't as big as the week before, which the Giant had been the week before. Mm-hmm. Been there the week before. We had about 1,100 fans, and actually, this is going to be kind of fun for me to throw these numbers out here because we're in Dothan, Alabama, a town that's going to become a monster good one. You got 1,100 fans, and it drew half as many fans as Knoxville spot show of Corbin, Kentucky that same night. So think about that.
Yeah.
Corbin, Kentucky is about 7,000 fans, 7,000 people.
Yeah.
And so it just gives you an indication of how bad the territory was in. And we got a long way to go. Okay, it was kind of disappointing, but you couldn't let yourself get down with those small crowds. I mean, I had to work on it big time, man, in the early stages of this new territory. Yeah. Because your wrestlers were always watching you, man. And if they saw disappointment in your face, that was the last thing they needed to see, man. You had to keep them fired up. You had to keep them wanting it. And you had to keep them driving it. And those heels had to be getting that heat. And it was all going to turn around. You had to just be so positive about, guys, we're going to blow this thing apart. And that's what we did with this very first crew. Within 6 months, we took this thing from dead to selling out. It was unbelievable.
Wow.
So the day is going to come, like I said, when Little Dothan, that drew 1,100 fans that night is going to draw as many fans as Knoxville just about.
Hey, I tell you, that's a fact. I saw a lot of crowds there, over 4,000 myself as a youngster. So, all right, let's get to the learning tree question for today. It comes from a gentleman named Tim Frederick. He asked, was any babyface in any territory ever as good as the Bullet was in Continental? He goes on to say, I can think of Dusty Rhodes in Florida and the Von Erichs in Texas, and that's it. So what do you think for Tim?
Well, man, that's a really great question, isn't it? That's a really good question, man. There's probably all different kinds of ways to answer this one, but I'm going to do it in a kind of an unusual way. My answer is going to be a little bit different, I think, than maybe most people would. I think the equation here, Tim, here, and the real answer is they picked people, and it depended on the generation they were born in and what part of the country you lived in. Mm-hmm. And, because professional wrestling had been around for about 100 years, it's been around for a long time. And probably your grandfather, Tim, and his father, your grandfather and your father, they might have both been wrestling fans. And if so, they probably had their favorites, just like you, and the Bullet, they probably had theirs. And thousands of other fans had their favorites, And each generation, think about it, they all saw different wrestlers. Wrestlers came, they got old, they left. And the next generation had their own favorites, depending on who they saw in that part of the country and where they lived. So let's just look at the fans. Let's just take one generation, man. Let's bust it down at the 1970s and 80s generation. That's kind of the ones he mentioned, Dusty and Von Erichs. That's the 70s and 80s era. Dusty was obviously king in Florida, man. There's no doubt about that. And the Von Erichs were all of them kings in Dallas and in that area. But if you lived in Louisiana during that time frame, you was in love with the Junkyard Dog, Sylvester Ritter.
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
He'd be your man. And if you were in New York in that same time frame, Bruno
Yeah.
Sammartino's your man.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
He's the best you've ever seen.
Yeah.
He's the man you love. If you're in Memphis, Tennessee,
I know.
it's Jerry the King Lawler, by God.
Yes.
There ain't no doubt about it.
Yeah.
If you're in Minnesota and the AWA territory, it's either Vern Gagne or Nick Bockwinkel. So, it didn't make it just, every person felt differently depending on where they were and the generation and the time frame of the wrestlers that they got to see. So I agree that the Southeastern and Continental during the 1970s and 80s, I agree with you, Mr. Frederick. It's Bob Armstrong. It was the bullet. The bullet was on fire for years,
Yeah.
And the great thing about our sport, Tim out there, Tim, I think it's your name. The great thing about our sport was that there was so many fantastic stars from the 1920s all the way into the 1990s to choose from, man. So many great wrestlers. The sad part about this whole deal is this new generation of fans. I'm talking about the one now. The millennials, man, they don't have the same opportunity anymore to see near as many stars as we did back in the old days. And but at least Dave, we all have our memories, man.
Boy, don't we? And you can't take those away. That's a great answer, Ron, and another tremendous Studcast. Hey, folks, on Facebook, to become friends with the living legend, the Stud. On Facebook, simply go to either his Ron Fuller, the Tennessee Stud, or Ron Fuller Welch author page, either of those two. Like and follow him there, and you automatically become friends with the Stud that way. On Twitter, follow him on Ron Fuller Welch. Find everything on Ron's website, tnstud.com. That's one of the most famous addresses in wrestling, tnstud.com. Studcast, Super Studcast. Historic videos, photo gallery, his stud store with souvenirs of all kinds, autographed photos, tremendous Continental DVD wrestling 5-packs, T-shirts, Tennessee Stud mask, and his chilling novel, Brutus. Visit now at tnstud.com. That's tnstud.com. The Southeastern Rewind YouTube channel has many things, but Stud's streaming channel, ClassicContinentalWrestling.com, ClassicContinentalWrestling.com will have everything. It'll have it all. Everything that the Stud has ever produced in the past, in the present, and on into the future. It'll be added to daily for years to come. Don't miss the first 3-hour Stars of the Sport with Andre the Giant. Now on there. This week's Star of the Sport is the 3-hour Enforcer, Arn Anderson. Man, that's tough choosing right there. Part 1 with Arn airs Thursday, March 17th. Part 2, Sunday, March 20th. Don't miss out, fans, on old school's greatest wrestling deal. Stream everything that is the Tennessee Stud. ClassicContinentalWrestling.com. ClassicContinentalWrestling.com. Only $4.99 per month or $39.99 per year. Gets it all. Everything. Subscribe today and get a free week bonus on your first month. You can also gift your subscription if you want to, meaning give it to someone even in another town. All right, Stud, where do we ride next week?
Well, we're going to go to both territories again, man. We're going to see how long I'm capable of doing this, man. March 12th, we're going to be looking at 1978 in Knoxville, that card. And it has 2 title matches on it. That has a brass knucks match between Ronnie Garvin and Joe LeDuc. And it's got a special event where Ricky Gibson gets his second shot at Gorgeous George Jr. Remember, Gorgeous George Jr. didn't show up for the first one. If he doesn't show up for this one, he's gone from Southeastern. So Southeastern Gulf Coast on the southern end, man, down there in Southeastern Gulf Coast is going to be in Dothan, Alabama. The matches are going to be on Friday night, March 17th, 1978. Same week as that Knoxville card. This one's got a 6-man tag. 6-match card, with a return match for the Gulf Coast belt from the finals of this studcast here. Bob Armstrong's going to be defending against the guy that he beat to win that belt. That was David Schultz. And I'll be wrestling one of the all-time favorites in that part of the country down there, Dave, a little old strong man, Greg Peterson, man. And I'm going to have some fun with this one and tell a special story about it to boot.
All right.
So then there's another great learning tree question, man, next week. And it's what was the relationship between booker and owner when it came to decisions such as hiring or firing talent, paying guarantees, angles, title changes, world title shots, or even the position on the card. The guys were placed on the card. The great question right there, man. How did the owner deal with the booker on all those points right there?
Yeah.
And as always, I want to thank every listener out there today, and please tell your friends and neighbors about us. I hope everybody's enjoying these, and I think they're just going to continue to get better and better. And take good care of yourselves and others, and may God bless us all.
Wow. Well done, Ron. For Ron Fuller in the Great Smoky Mountains, I'm David Summers, saying thank you for listening. Find me at davidsummersproductions@gmail.com. This Studcast is a David Summers production for Tennessee Stud, LLC.
Thanks for joining us today for this historic Studcast. The true story continues next week. So full Nelson your friends and point them in our direction for another ride with the Tennessee Stud.
1, 2, 3.
This is David Summers saying so long from the Great Smoky Mountains.